a couple of days ago, Pete Hegseth was at the NATO forum was at a forum for NATO, talking with Jens Stoltenberg, the NATO Secretary General, talking to the press about how more firepower is coming to Ukraine. That's the way Hegseth put it. Don't worry, everybody. Don't worry, NATO. Before, America was getting sold out, giving out a bunch of handouts, giving out a bunch of free stuff before they're getting sold out. But now more firepower is coming to Ukraine. A change in tone from the type of stuff that Hegseth was concentrating on last time he crossed the Atlantic. It was engaging in diplomatic charades across with our NATO allies. That seems to be a little bit more serious tenor. Seems to be a little bit more forceful tenor, as if a diplomatic effort has borne zero fruit and has given you nothing but a rotten harvest. But listen to the tenor of this dialogue, because I want to use this and compare it to what we're hearing from Trump now, post his Putin phone call and new Zelensky meeting. Because leading up to this, the way Trump was talking is Putin doesn't want peace. The Russians are acting unserious. He's been dragged along for over 9 months with him in office, including the time when he was president-elect, because he did talk for some time about ending it before he was even president, while he was still president-elect. Tim Pool and other alternative commentators talked about it very confidently. Carrie Lake and other of his, his sycophants, both those online and those who have actually ran for office, talked about it as if it was a real possibility, something to really be achieved. 9 months into him actually being in office, we're nowhere. We're no closer than we were at the start. In fact, the air attacks against Ukraine have escalated. They have launched multiple continued offensives through the Donbass. The summer offensive continued, and now we're going through a fall offensive. And now we've seen a ton of IFV assaults over the last month on the Pokrovsk axis, with over 50 Russian IFVs getting exploded. I mean, that is the amount of IFVs of some small countries that they have in their entire military arsenal getting blown up in a month in one little section of the front, the Pokrovsk-Konstantinivka axis, where a third of all these assaults are happening. And so we see an intensification of combat. We see an intensification of air attacks. And we don't see the war de-escalating. We see the war escalating, but no American reciprocal action to match it. And so now we have Pete Hegseth and Donald Trump beating their chests, saying, oh, it doesn't seem they really want peace. Oh, it doesn't seem they really want action. And we get some reports that some intelligence is being shared with the Ukrainians on Russian energy infrastructure. Before, during the last talks in Alaska, they told the Ukrainians to pause, hold off on attacking energy infrastructure. Don't attack one of the most vulnerable parts of the Russian energy economy, which funds the war, their refineries. Hold off on that. Then after that meeting, they said, okay, you know what? We didn't get anywhere at the Alaska meeting. We didn't get anywhere. It seems that Vladimir Putin used the whole Alaska meeting to Reddit post. And when I say that, I'm not exaggerating. Look, I knew at the time it didn't go well. The meeting was supposed to have a lunch and a brunch afterwards with Marco Rubio, a bunch of other officials. They just canceled that after like an hour and a half, 2 hour long talk. And I knew that despite a lot of the public posturing, that it didn't, and a lot of the, PR statements afterward, that it didn't seem to go as well as Trump would have wanted. Obviously, they didn't come out with a peace deal, but it got so bad that we actually saw Vladimir Putin just history posting, Reddit posting. One second, let me read this to you. This is from the Financial Times. Putin delivered a rambling historical discussion spanning medieval princes such as Rurik of Novgorod and Yaroslav the Wise. Remember that Tucker Carlson ramble that left Tucker baffled? This, what are you talking about, dude? It seems that this is a habit of his. And I said it at the time that was Putin. That some people might say that's not Putin, that's just for the cameras, just for the domestic audience. Why in the hell would Vladimir Putin, in a private, unaired talk with the President of the United States, start talking about 17th century Cossack chieftains and Yaroslav the Wise's horse and Rurik of Novgorod when he was... Why would he be talking about this and hyper obsessing on it if he was not like your dad after watching Ancient Aliens, thinking that he knew something, and the only difference is your dad uses it to justify a awkwardly ignorant conversation about the pyramids at the dinner table. Putin uses it to justify the largest war in Europe since World War II. And Donald Trump, being subjected to this, actually raised his voice several times, trying to like be like, you know, what are we talking about here? And at one point even threatened to walk out of the meeting, which probably would not have been the diplomatic signal Putin wanted to send, and could be used as a green light for a lot of the pro-Ukraine caucus in America to pounce and try to get Trump to do a drastic action. So they're able to avert that, but they weren't able to get any closer to peace. So in the aftermath of that, where one Western official said the whole thing is ideological for him, this is after the Alaska, he still thinks he can win. At the same time that Trump's saying maybe Ukraine could take it all back, maybe Ukraine could take back X, Y, and Z in the aftermath of that meeting. Very different pages. This is the moment that Hegseth came out and said, you know, more firepower, more this, more of that coming to Ukraine, alongside Stoltenberg here. And for them, for Stoltenberg, this is a great moment. You can listen how proud he is to talk about their action.
Strong. But I particularly want to thank President Trump and you personally for your leadership and the whole team for the fact that NATO is now much stronger, more lethal, but it is also fairer, because we know that since President Eisenhower there was this constant irritant that yes, NATO was there, the US was committed, but also had a clear expectation that EU allies and Canada would step up. And we took that historic decision in The Hague, thanks to your leadership, equalizing defense spending on this side of the pond and in Canada with what the US is spending. And I think that's extremely important. And I also want to thank President Trump and you personally again, and of course the whole American leadership team, for the fact that when it comes to Ukraine, you decided to again make sure that they have what they need from the US, paid for by allies, and that program is now running. 2 billion committed so far, and today I expect many new announcements of countries who will participate. So all in all, we are making great progress. Again, thank you so much, Pete, for everything you are doing. Mark.
It's great to see you. Great to see you. Absolutely. Great to be here. And Mark mentioned it, firepower. That's what is coming. We expect it is coming from NATO. And it was a historic summit just a couple of months ago.
So this is the type of dialogue we're getting in advance of a Zelensky meeting that happened today. But in advance of that Zelensky meeting that happened today, we had something else announced, that Donald Trump would be having a call with Vladimir Putin. And when I heard that he was going to be having a call on Thursday, yesterday, before today's meeting with Zelensky, this is what I put out. This was my prediction. This is what I thought was the likely outcome. And I based it off of learned actions, learned experience, not my hopes, not my dreams, not what I could delude myself into what's going to happen or what I want to happen, but what has happened and Trump's repeated behavior, as well as what I think motivates him. And I'll explain it in a moment. So this is me saying what Putin, I assume, is going to say in the phone call, or said in the phone call. Okay, Donald, I agree. Peace is good. Don't send Ukraine weapons. How about instead we hold another summit? Finally win you that Nobel Peace Prize. Will he go for it? Trump's record on this so far has been hopeless. So any opportunity to divert action is always in the cards. Look, Donald Trump has been talking about sending Tomahawks for a bit now, and he said that he'd come to something like a decision recently, which seemed to be a hint that he had agreed to send Tomahawks. Now, my position has always been that I do not think, and I said I'd eat my hat if I was proven wrong, that we're going to send Tomahawks to Ukraine. We're hearing about this 20 to 50 Tomahawks, but the reasons I gave for us not sending Tomahawks is, number one, there's, this is something that's more needed across the globe for the United States stockpile than other Cold War era or other munitions that we could provide or could work to provide instead of the Tomahawk. We don't have a lot of ground launchers, which is something we would conceivably provide to the Ukrainians for this system. And since we don't have a lot of ground launchers, the U.S. Army is going to fight for every single one of them. And so I thought it was more likely that a lot of noise would be made around the Tomahawk because it's the name, it's the weapon that people know. But then ultimately, if any missile is delivered, it would be a different system, right? But that still is under the assumption that maybe a system could be delivered. Not the Tomahawk, but some system could be delivered. But Trump, Zelensky, and all the public debate, all the public conversation has been around the Tomahawk. And in advance of this phone call, that's where the talk has been focused. Whether or not Ukraine's effort to target Russian oil refineries is going to be assisted by the United States. See, we know that there is some intelligence assistance that's being provided. So it seems that the Trump administration has acknowledged that the Ukrainian air campaign to target Russian oil refineries is working. We've seen that Russia has stopped the export of gasoline not only through the month of September, which was their announcement before, but throughout the entirety of the rest of the war. They have suspended these gasoline shipments. And so that means less sales, that means less revenue for Russian energy companies, but that also means that they can deal with the domestic fuel shortages that we're seeing, especially in the rural regions of Russia, that are being in part caused by the Ukrainian energy campaign against refineries across the country, with American numbers saying that over 1 in 5 of these Russian refineries being knocked out, a record, by these Ukrainian drones. Not because they're delivering such wider and larger payloads, but because they have so many more drones as their production numbers have skyrocketed, and after making all that investment into the amount of drones and expanding that, they're aiming for the more vulnerable pieces of the systems, of the energy infrastructure. Instead of just aiming for this tank or that tank or showing that they can hit in the area, they are hitting the most expensive parts of these refineries that they need to import other parts for that they're currently being sanctioned on. And that's causing problems. Even if they can get those parts, it's going to be expensive. And what if that refinery gets hit all the same in just a couple more months? And now they have to repeat the entire process again. So we acknowledge through our providing of intelligence and giving them the green light after the Alaska summit failed. And I want to emphasize that after the Alaska summit, the in-person meeting between Donald Trump and Vladimir Putin got absolutely nowhere, failed in no uncertain terms. After that failed, we were talking about action. We were talking about something. 75% of Americans want more action. And instead of getting more action, we now know that there's going to be a phone call. And then they have the phone call. We are fearful that it's going to be Putin using it as another opportunity to say 2 more weeks, 2 more weeks, 2 more weeks. And what do we get? This Truth Social post. I have just concluded my telephone conversation with President Vladimir Putin of Russia, and it was a very productive one. President Putin congratulated me and the United States on the great accomplishment of peace in the Middle East. Mind you, there is still violence going on in Syria. There is still violence going on even in Gaza. There is still violence going on in other parts of the region. But Gaza, there's currently not announced war, announced firing between Israeli forces and Palestinian forces. There have been Palestinians that have been shot because they crossed the line that they're not supposed to cross, and there have been executions by Hamas of Israeli-backed militias in the Gaza Strip. So there's still been violence. Peace in the Middle East is what it's been called. Something that he said has been dreamed of for centuries. I actually believe that the success in the Middle East, by the way, when he talks about this, he does say this is the first time this has been achieved in like 500 years. That's the way he talks about it. That's genuinely how Trump sees it. Is it childish? Yes. Is it ahistorical? Absolutely. Is this how Donald Trump gets gassed up so people can manipulate him? Looks like it. It's seemingly. I actually believe that the success in the Middle East will help in our negotiation and attaining an end to the war with Russia, Ukraine. Remember when I said that Trump is hopelessly hopeful? He's tragically hopeful, I believe is the way I put it. What I mean by that is Donald Trump wants that Nobel Peace Prize. Donald Trump wants to deliver on that promise he made on the campaign trail, a promise he shouldn't have made because he couldn't deliver on it when it comes to ending the war between Russia and Ukraine. Definitely considering that in order to bring about the war, other pressures might have to be introduced that could take time, as I think we're finding out, and as many of Trump's advisors and many people in Trump world know, but they're waiting for the president to get there solidly, and just waiting and waiting, you might end up waiting at the station forever. Either way, um, he made a promise that he couldn't deliver on. Now Putin is taking advantage of the fact that he wants to deliver on peace as fast as possible by continuing to dangle the possibility of it right out of reach, while also laying out the fear of, well, if you send Ukraine something, negotiations might be defunct. Who knows? That'll just bring us further down the line, further down the line. And you can hear this type of dialogue, not just from Trump when it comes to being this type of tragic hopefulness. You can hear it from other people in Trump's orbit. For example, here's Representative Paula Ann Luna. This is one of the new types of MAGA conservative. POTUS is likely going to be able to negotiate a multi-trillion-dollar trade deal with Russia, which would greatly impact our markets positively. Please join me in praying for the president as he navigates this process. There are many people that want war. He does not. Peace is the prize. Let us also pray for the people of Russia and Ukraine. Peace is very close. What planet does she live on? What war is she talking about? This is not the war that I see on the front line. This is not the war that I hear from grad strikes, from artillery strikes, from drone strikes. But this type of tragic hopefulness of being able to achieve that Nobel Peace Prize, of having it dangled right in front of him, because it would be so much easier if we just got the solution now than doing the hard, dirty work of building a peace for tomorrow by putting the factors and the different currents in place necessary to compel the Russians to make peace, not to ask them kindly. But we're still in the asking them kindly stage of the war. We're still at the asking kindly. And by the way, you can see Kirill Dmitriev and all of these people in the Russian government on social media signaling to Paula Ann Luna, signaling to others, trying to get the far-right support to try to drag out this as long as possible, to keep that faction active and open and talking about dragging these negotiations on, as the vast majority of Americans have long negotiated the idea that this is going to get, have long abandoned the idea that this is going to get anywhere. Listen to this Kirill Dmitriev, one of Putin's right-hand men. The dialogue lives on despite every attempt by warmongers to sabotage peace. Stay tuned. Peace, 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 between bombings and major offensives. Look, the Russians want to delay further American action because they want the best possible position going into any talk where they could then assert their maximalist demands and make them look most believable. They made statements about taking Pokrovsk by a certain date to Donald Trump that did not end up being true. If they sit down and have these talks before they've captured Pokrovsk, that will be pretty embarrassing. I think they're trying to delay the talks until they've captured Pokrovsk. Then they can have those talks and make maximalist demands again. And even if Trump then reacts to that angry because we're still at the same point, even though there's a possibility, he says, oh, well, I guess it does seem different now, doesn't it? Maybe before, but maybe it's different now. Pokrovsk has fallen. Even if that's the case, Putin still succeeded in delaying action for another month. I mean, Donald Trump has been, we're going on a year now. A year of inaction for a war that's been going on for 4 years. We're talking about 25% of the war where we've been sitting on our hands, where the Russians have been succeeding in delaying further action from the American government. So, this has been completely a success when it comes to the delaying side. Also, the different inroads and way that the Russians signaled to Trump's base to try to keep them on their side as they've lost them due to the way that they keep making Trump just look silly for taking them seriously in these types of talks. Listen to what Paula Ann Luna said the foreign ministry is doing, the Russian foreign ministry is doing for her constituents. My office just received word from the Russian embassy that the ambassador from Russia to the United States will be hand delivering the government of Russia's findings on who assassinated JFK to my office. This is a 350-page document. We will be uploading these documents as soon as we receive them and working with Jeffrey Moroni to ensure that the American people have direct access to them immediately. How little they do backflips for. How little they roll over for. Anyway, let's finish this reading. President Putin thanked the First Lady Melania for her involvement with children. He was very, well, you want to talk about kidnapped children? That would be a good time. He was very appreciative and said that this will continue. He also spent a great deal of time talking about trade between Russia and the United States when the war with Ukraine is over. Isn't that interesting? Instead of talking about ways to end the war, he's talking about ways to make money. At the conclusion of the call, we agreed that there will be a meeting of our high-level advisors next week. United States initial meetings will be led by Secretary of State Marco Rubio, together with various other people to be designating. A meeting location is being determined. President Putin and I will then meet in an agreed-upon location, Budapest, Hungary, to see if we can bring the inglorious war between Russia and Ukraine to an end. President Zelensky and I will be meeting tomorrow in the Oval Office, where we will discuss my conversation with President Putin and much more. I believe great progress was made today with the telephone conversation. Mind you, the president doesn't present any progress that is physical. Like, hey, we've gotten a ceasefire, which he has stopped asking for in its entirety. He has completely abandoned asking for a ceasefire. It's now the Ukrainians and the Europeans who demand that. When Donald Trump used to draw red lines in the sand over ceasefire, now it's like he never even heard the word ceasefire. So there's no physical thing that the Russians have committed to. There's no physical thing that the Russians have done. There is nothing that the Russians have done for the last 9 months, going on 10 months, about to be 10 months, outside of talk about talking. And now, after the first peace summit, didn't even finish due to the complete absence of any progress. We're now talking about a second peace summit. And the peace summit's going to be where? Hungary. Hungary. Can I just say, if the Hungarians are involved at all in facilitating this conversation or adding advice to this conversation, then the odds of success are only going to go down. Because whatever they could cook up, if anything is cooked up, I find it hard to believe that the Ukrainians are going to be very eager to not only listen to that type of Russian proposal, cooked up without them, to listen to that type of Russian proposal cooked up without them with the Hungarians. So I don't think Hungary is the place to have this type of dialogue. I do wonder how President Putin is going to get to Budapest, Hungary. What flight path he is going to use. I am actually kind of curious about that. But the way that this is seemingly going is no immediate action on long-range munitions for the Ukrainians. Maybe a training will go on in private. Maybe it will not. But even that is up in the air because of the way that Donald Trump has talked about these munitions. But before we get to that, I do want to point out one interaction that Caroline Levitt had with a reporter who asked, a Huffington Post reporter, who asked, why Budapest for a possible Putin meeting? And the answer from Caroline Levitt was, your mom. Then Stephen Chung, another Trump official, repeated it once the official asked the question again. And once the reporter asked it again, thinking maybe something had been misheard, and then the other Trump official reiterated it. So if there's a question about whether the Hungarians have a successful record in facilitating talks and negotiations, whether there's a conversation about whether or not the Ukrainians, who always wanted to be present during these talks, are not going to be present at these talks, of continuously adding environments to make the Russians happy, well, not at all, considering an environment that will produce an outcome that actually gets through the second hurdle, which is the Ukrainian side. Only response we got is your mom. So we didn't get much outside of Donald Trump basically saying that I like the Hungarians, I like the Russians like the Hungarians, they like me. So that seems to be the way that we're going. This seems to be the same old, though. And when I say this is the same old, we're even back to the 2-week time frame, the famous 2-week time frame. We've had 3 or 4 2-week delays where President Trump has asked, how long will it take for us to hear an update on Ukraine or to know? Or the usual question is, how long until we know if Putin's serious? And he said 2 weeks 4 months ago. He said 2 weeks 3 months ago. And he said 2 weeks 2 months ago. And now he's saying 2 weeks once again.
Your call with President Putin today, you spoke about meeting in Hungary with him. Do you have a timeline or a date set for when?
Yeah, I would say within 2 weeks or so, pretty quick. Marco Rubio is going to be meeting with his counterpart, as you know, Lavrov, and they'll be meeting pretty soon.
So Lavrov and Marco Rubio will meet. There will, and I can tell you how this is gonna go. Okay, I can tell you how this is gonna go right now. I hate to be the one to spoil this, but the way I think this is gonna go is that Lavrov and Marco Rubio will meet. They will talk about, Russia will talk about its demands. They will say that the root causes of the conflict must be addressed. They will say the root causes of the conflict are things like NATO expansion, or things like Ukrainian nationalism, or things like the unrecognition of the annexation of Crimea, the annexation of Donetsk, the annexation of Luhansk, the annexation of Zaporizhia, and the annexation of Kherson. They'll say another barrier to peace is the annexation of the rest of the Donetsk region, not only Pokrovsk, if they take that in the next 3 months, which seems to be what they're aiming towards, is taking Pokrovsk in the immediate future to give them an edge, but also Konstantinivka, also Slovyansk, and of course, Kramatorsk. They're not going to back off on the constitutional demands of the territory that they hold, and I don't think they're even going to back off the territory that their constitution says that they control, which they don't control, including the only regional capital that they captured, which they were thrown out of, which was the capital of Kherson, where they're doing the human safari. They will reiterate their maximalist demands. They will talk about further negotiations, this time including, in this new framework, Ukrainian officials, and they'll try to see if they can continue the dialogue without, again, taking any physical action that would actually indicate a halt to violence, or at least a de-escalation of violence, i.e., hey, we're going to stop long-range strikes, but we're not going to stop frontline action. Hey, we're going to stop attacks on Ukrainian electricity, but we're going to do X. I mean, they agreed to an energy ceasefire at the start of Trump's term. What the fuck happened to that? They also agreed to a civilian ceasefire. Well, Trump said they did. The Russians never even publicly commented on it. So I think that this is going to be 2 weeks. They're going to have a week dialogue between Marco Rubio and Lavrov to set up the big talk between Putin and Trump and Viktor Orban in Hungary. That'll happen towards the end of October. And so that will mean delaying action into November. Mind you, it seems that Donald Trump has a bucket of excuses as to why he wants to delay action, with Tomahawk being the last big discussion point. There is a bucket of excuses as to why he wouldn't want to send that Tomahawk. Hey, we need it for ourselves. Hey, the ground launch systems. Hey, the U.S. Army wants it. And so once, there was a question about sending it, he had that bucket of excuses to deliver.
Anybody that ended wars, I ended 8 of them. Now it's going to be 9. I think we're going to have this one done, hopefully soon. But I'll be meeting him probably over the next 2 weeks. First, Marco is going to be meeting, and the vice president, as you know, is very much involved. The whole team is involved. Steve Witkoff will be involved. Yeah, please.
What did you tell them about the Tomahawks? Did you discuss the Tomahawk missiles? Did you?
Talked about it a little bit, didn't say much, but I do say to you, you know, we need Tomahawks for the United States of America, too. We have a lot of them, but we need them. I mean, we can't deplete for our country. So, you know, they're very vital. They're very powerful. They're very accurate. They're very good, but we need them, too. So I don't know what we can do about that.
Mind you, this is after the talk with Putin. How did that go when it comes to Tomahawks? He did say that he joked about sending them 50,000 or something Tomahawks. Ridiculous number that no one, including Putin, was ever going to believe. Just like a he even called it lighthearted. A bluff that would never be respected. A bluff that would never be believed. But you can hear his tone. And this is in reference to Putin. And this call, if you wanted to spur Putin to action, you're going to have to be like, look, I am going to send him the Tomahawk. I am going to be doing that. Or I am going to be sending him some sort of long-range munition. And we're going to tear apart your oil refineries. We're going to tear apart XYZ unless you come to the table. There's no announcement of him doing that. There's no dialogue about whether or not, you know, we're going to get those types of weapons to Ukraine in the next 2 to 3 weeks. If peace is not achieved, it's just right back to the soft-handed, limp-wristed, pillow-fisted negotiating tactics of Donald Trump 5, 6, 7 months ago towards the Russians. People were talking about him getting on the right track. People were saying, like, hey, Trump's finally getting better on Ukraine, and he's just falling straight back into the bad habits because he desperately would want this issue basically to just go away, and it seems like he's being hopeful towards that end. That it basically goes away and that he doesn't have to worry about it anymore. And so instead of making threats to the Russians that could actually compel them to act by saying we will send X, Y, and Z, we will sanction you in X, Y, and Z way, with 75% of Americans saying that they want more actions. They want additional sanctions on Russians. 75, 3 out of 4 Americans are saying the United States is not doing enough. They are not doing enough to pressure the Russians. This is an easy, popular policy for Trump to pick up, and he continues to delay it because he wants to be able to grab that peacemaker-in-chief label. He wants that desperately, but there has to be a question of complicity, of if whether or not he's being complicit to a certain extent. If there is a hope that at some point, you know, after a summer, after the winter, after some period of time, Ukrainians will drain out and the Russians will drain out, and it'll just all handle itself without American action. But at the end of the day, even if that is to happen, it will take longer and it will be bloodier, and it could happen in a way that does not lean towards America's interest. The tree could fall in a way that damages the United States instead of for America doing what Trump said he actually wanted to do, which is a peace through strength policy. But currently, it's like, I don't know where the strength is. It's like all zero peace and no strength. I don't see how that equation works very well. By the way, when Donald Trump talks about the war up to this point, he still says all the same ignorant, dumb nonsense that he was saying on the campaign trail. So for anybody who thought that this time around getting back in the Situation Room was going to correct some misconceptions he had about the war, that is not the case, including his misconception that without the javelins he sent Ukraine, you know, Ukraine would have collapsed at the start, and the war could have gone differently if the Russians, and I quote, didn't go through the mud.
I think that he should have won the war in a week. Yeah, I do think. And if we didn't give the anti-tank missiles, as you know, the javelins they call them, they got stuck in the mud. They would have been in Kiev very quickly. They were heading to Kiev. So, you know, in war you have a lot of luck too. You know, weather has won war, and the cold and the heat and all things take place in war. But that was a very interesting moment when the tanks started rolling and some brilliant general said, let's go through the mud instead of going down the highway, right? So they got...
He doesn't know the basics. He doesn't know how can you believe this guy thought that there was an encirclement in Kursk? Can you believe that this guy can get played by an experienced leader? and Vladimir Putin with KGB background. Can you believe that this guy can be made to think just about anything on the war, given the right circumstances, if you catch him at the right moment? I mean, the idea, oh, the Russians didn't take Kiev because they didn't go down the highway. The convoy down the highway between Belarus and Kiev was so legendary, so long and dense with manpower and vehicles, and they were getting ambushed. They were getting strafed not only by infantry ambush teams with RPGs, but they were getting constantly patrolled by drones, giving back coordinates to artillery teams. Bayraktar attack UAVs were bombing the line. I mean, they went down the road. It's just those roads became kill zones that then got piled up with debris that then infantry had to go in and clear out, and then had to fight the Ukrainians street by street into the suburbs, never reaching the city itself. They decided to invade during a period where there would be a lot of mud. And that meant the alternatives to what Trump's talking about, going down the highway, going around the highway, became much more difficult, and it complicated the offensives. So not only is Trump saying not accurate, what Trump's saying didn't happen, did happen, and it led to well, basically choke points where the Russians got mauled, not only in Kiev. So you can say that Trump's theory of warfare here particularly didn't work. The same thing happened in Kharkiv, where there were Russians. The only difference in Kharkiv is Russian soldiers actually did break through into Kharkiv. They got chewed up, and then every time they tried to do it again, they got chewed up until they just peppered the city endlessly with artillery. So if there's any hope that Donald Trump was going to figure out how the war progressed, were really just some of the bare basics of the war. I hate to be the bearer of bad news. Mind you, if you listen to Donald Trump talk about it now, like before he was talking about Putin as, you know what, I don't think he really wants a deal. I don't think he really needs a deal. And from Putin's, I mean, he needs it, but it's not good. I mean, come on, guys, come on. And then you hear Donald Trump talking about the economy is on the brink of collapse, and Putin should get a deal immediately. And why isn't he moving towards a deal? And this was him just like 5 days ago. Not even. This was 4 days ago.
Could you preview your meeting with Ukraine President Zelensky on Friday? You expect to talk about weapons?
Yeah, no, we have an interesting meeting going. And look, I'm very disappointed because Vladimir and I had a very good relationship, probably still do. I don't know why he continues with this war. This war has been so bad for him.
I don't know why he continues. It's been so bad for him. I'm so disappointed in him. He's clearly laying the blame on Putin. Once again, at every stage of this, it was the Ukrainians agreed to the ceasefire. The Russians didn't. They agreed to a unconditional ceasefire. The Russians didn't. After Putin, after Trump's red lines, his sanction red lines didn't do anything. He never pulled the trigger on sanctions anyway. He didn't tariff the Russians. It didn't get him anywhere. He tried to play nice with the Russians for 10 months now. It didn't get him anywhere.
He's going into 4 years of a war that should have he should have won that war in 1 week. He's now going to soon be into his 4th year. He's lost 1.5 million soldiers, probably close. Certainly in terms of wounded and no legs and no arms and all the things that happen in horrible wars. It's a horrible war. That's the biggest thing that's happened since World War II in terms of death. It's bigger than any of them. I settled 8 of them. The biggest is that in terms of death. Incredible. I think India, Pakistan had great potential too. We did a great job of that one. But
so this is how he's talking about it just like 4 days ago. Listen to how he talks about it now in his Truth Social post that he made after his meeting with Zelensky and his phone call with Putin. The meeting with President Vladimir Zelensky of Ukraine was very interesting and cordial, but I told him, as I likewise strongly suggested to President Putin, that it's time to stop the killing and make a deal. This means nothing. It means nothing. If you go to Zelensky and say, I'm going to freeze your aid until you agree to a ceasefire, and I'm going to go, you're ungrateful, why you're not wearing a suit, and oh, you're being disrespectful in the White House, and XYZ, and okay, we agree to a ceasefire. Finally, we got the warmonger, Zelensky, who, by the way, shouldn't have started this war. Shouldn't have started this war. Anyway, Russians, do you want to agree to a ceasefire? Yet. But well, Zelensky, don't you agree that it's time to make a deal? Like 4 days ago, it was, I'm very disappointed with Putin. I'm very disappointed with Putin. I'm very disappointed with Putin. Zelensky walks into Oval Office. It's time for you to make a deal. What type of a deal? What deal? Announce the details of the deal. How did Donald Trump succeed in the Gaza peace process? Because he announced a 20-point deal, then applied pressure to make that deal, and then the deal happened, right? To very, very simplify the process after over 2 years of very brutal bloodshed. Gone on over 4 years of brutal bloodshed for the Russian invasion of Ukraine. What do we have in this case? We have Donald Trump going out in public, making hints of pressure, never actually pulling the trigger on anything. And then after making hints of pressure and not pulling trigger on anything, making hints of pressure towards the Ukrainians, actually pulling the trigger on a few things, then unpulling the trigger on a few of those things, and then making a bunch of threats, not delivering on those threats over 7 times. And then 9, 10 months later, okay, it seems to be the Russians that are doing this. It seems to be the Russians. They seem to be the problem. But anyway, can we just all make a deal? Like, that's not how you make it. Announce what you believe the deal should be, and they make pressures towards that deal. And the way that the American government has talked about a deal that would be one that is possible, maybe possible, maybe not should be accepted. The Ukrainian government should take some more territory back, obviously. There's a lot of things that the Ukrainians could demand. But the deal that they pushed is just freeze the lines where they are. And the Russians refuse. So what do? You add pressure if that fails. But they have yet to openly recommit to that deal and then apply pressure on it. They've committed to the deal, then asked for it, then pulled back from it, then just called for people to make a deal. Generally speaking, it's so limp-wristed in the way that it engages with it. It needs to be more assertive. Enough blood has been shed, with property lines being defined by war and guts. They should stop where they are. Okay. Let both claim victory. Let history decide. Very stupid mentality, but okay. No more shooting. No more death. No more vast and unsustainable sums of money spent. This is a war that should have never started if I was president. Thousands of people are being slaughtered every week. No more. Go home to your families in peace. So he says, freeze it. You know what the Ukrainians said? Okay. They said, unconditional ceasefire right now, fine. They've agreed to that. Then what? So what now? So why are we treating it like it's okay, you both need to agree to a deal? The Ukrainians agreed to your ceasefire. You then backed off the position of ceasefire and then called for a general deal where they freeze the lines. But the Russians, every time you call for a general deal where they freeze the lines, will talk about the root causes of the conflict, not accepting it. The Ukrainians have their own demands about getting their territory back, but they're willing to freeze the lines, let it be where it is, and live in this limbo for the time being, which is really the closest and fastest and clearest pathway to immediate cessation of hostilities and death. That's the only immediate pathway that you could see. Not Ukraine giving up its most defensible positions in the Donetsk region and just hoping and praying that the Russians will never attack again. This is just, again, it's just him just asserting that they should freeze the line while doing nothing to make them freeze the line. It is the Russians that are moving the line currently. They are the ones that are engaging in the offensive actions. It's not surprising that they're the ones that are not that interested in freezing the lines right now, because they're the ones engaging in the offensive actions because they want to capture Pokrovsk, they want to capture Konstantinivka, they want to capture Kramatorsk, they want to take Kherson again after they were pushed out of it. Whether or not the Ukrainians recognize those annexations, recognize the territories taken illegally, that's completely irrespective to the immediate freezing of the line. So again, until Donald Trump decides that it's time for actions and not words, until he starts to live by the philosophy that he preached on the campaign trail of peace through strength, until he decides to flex that strength in this direction, we're going to continue to be in this limbo. You cannot, I mean, Donald Trump did say, and he said this multiple times now, he really thought that he could just get peace with the Russians because Putin was his friend, that he had a personal relationship with Vladimir Putin, and he, through his business relationships to his political relationships, he prioritizes those personal, private relationships very highly in the negotiation process. And in this case, way too highly, delusionally highly, off of this planet highly. He's past the moon. He's discovering new solar systems out there. He's so far off base. And the idea that being friendly with Putin was going to get you anywhere. Obviously, this has failed. And if he continues to repeat the same behavior again, these numbers of the majority of the American people wanting more and more and more action is only going to increase. And he's only going to further embarrass himself. The question is, how long is he going to embarrass himself? And is there a reason outside of it that he's willing to do it? Does he really think that it's just a strategy of, we'll wait the Ukrainians out, eventually they will buckle? Because at a certain point where he continues to refuse to act, you have to say, you know, hopeful, someone being tragically hopeful that now the Russians will see the light on this round of negotiations. It has to eventually be switched out with, you can't claim naivete here. You can't claim it anymore. There's a point where you can no longer say that's naive. That's purposeful. And at this point, I've heard the case for it. I still think that a tragic hopefulness, definitely in the aftermath of the success of at least what we hope to be the success of a Gaza ceasefire, it's possible. But the fact that it's gone so poorly doesn't make that other outcome of a lack of naivete improbable. Kid Notorious 77 said, "What the F are you talking about? You know anything about politics? Are you retarded, you dumb fuck?" Caught me.